Hello, welcome to Group 2's presentation on the New York Police Department. The mission statement in the early 19th century for the New York Police Department was, "Our police, faithful and to death." The current New York Police Department mission reads, "To enhance the quality of life in our city by working in partnership with the community and in accordance with the constitutional rights to enforce the laws, preserve the peace, reduce fear, and provide for a safe environment." I'd like to start with a little bit of history about the New York Police Department. The department was established back in 1844. They started out with 1,200 officers with a military-style discipline as well as organization. It was actually modeled after London's Metropolitan Police Service. Some of the reasons for setting up the New York Police Department, which is also referred to as the NYPD, was the growing population in New York. The city's population had grown to over 300,000 toward the middle of the 1800s. And during that time, they only had one night watch, 100 city marshals, 31 constables, 51 police officers to patrol that huge population of people. So the city council called for a proposal to set up a larger and more defined police force. With the reorganization, the new force was established in May of 1845. The city was divided into 3 districts with courts, magistrates, and clerks, as well as station houses. And in 1853, they introduced a new navy blue uniform, which is the kind of the standard for what you see in most departments today. Quickly, there were 2 departments that could be noted within the police. In 1857, Republican reformers tried to stop the democratically controlled New York City government, and they created a new metropolitan police force. They eliminated the municipal police force that had been set up in 1844. The Metropolitan Police joined all the police in New York. The mayor and the municipals resisted, so the city actually had 2 police forces. There was the state-controlled Metropolitans, which had 300 policemen and 7 captains who left the municipal police. And basically, these folks were just raw recruits. They had little or no training. And there's also the mayor-controlled municipals. They had 800 policemen and 15 captains. So a little bit more organized. Within the 2 departments, there were ethnic divisions that were clearly noted. The immigrants tended to stay with the municipals, and the Anglo-Dutch heritage officers went with the metropolitans. The result was absolute chaos. There were criminals arrested by one force who were actually rescued by the other force. Arguments over station house possessions ensued. There were actually physical fights between rival policemen as well. The Metropolitans ended up winning control after a state regiment helped them defeat the municipals, and they actually also arrested the mayor. The Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the state law, and that eliminated the 2 departments. Hence, we had metropolitan rule, and you see here an old Metropolitan Police Force badge, but the Metropolitans weren't as effective as they had hoped to be. They actually failed to prevent rioting, and one day after they took control, there was gang rioting that went on for hours. It was some of the worst rioting the city had seen since 1849, and they actually had to call in the National Guard to help them out. And a week after this, German immigrants rioted. There was a blacksmith killed, and 10,000 people marched declaring that they were victims of the Metropolitan Police. So all was not good after the Metropolitans took over. Some other early notable issues included police brutality. This was in the late 19th century. Officers were using clubs to beat suspects, and people who challenged their authority, people who seemed to be unruly, and most of that brutality occurred in poor immigrant neighborhoods. There was also police corruption that should be noted. in the late 19th century. Politics and corruption by Irish immigrants infiltrated the NYPD. They awarded positions to loyalists, and officers and leaders took bribes to overlook infractions. Police served political purposes and basically turned a blind eye to things like ballot box stuffing and fraud. So there were some problems in the police force. Also in the late 19th century, there was the first major corruption investigation called the Lexow Commission in 1894, and they suggested an adoption of a civil service system for the police. Corruption investigations have been a regular feature of the NYPD since that first investigation. Some other notable investigations, the Knapp Commission in the 70s, the Molan Commission in the 90s, and some more notable changes here in the 20th century. The NYPD began to professionalize under the leadership of the president of the police board, Theodore Roosevelt, and some neat things came out of this professionalization. Science and technology was booming, and that allowed the force to establish some new units. Units like the Bomb Squad in 1905, the Motorcycle Squad in 1911, and up in the top right you can see some of the officers proudly standing by their motorcycles all lined up, being inspected there. There was also the Automobile Squad that was established in 1919. There was an emergency service unit set up in 1926, an aviation unit in 1929, a radio motor patrol in 1932, and they also implemented fingerprinting and mugshots. And you see one of the early mugshots down here in the lower right corner. I guess you could say they got all angles, with and without hats and things such as that. So pretty neat photo there, I think. Firearms have always been a part of police work, and we will take a look here at the early starts of firearm usage with the NYPD and come present day. In 1896, they used a long Colt caliber, and there was required firearms training even back then. There was pistol practice and qualification, and some of the things that we use today, which you may be familiar with some of the names of these weapons, are the SIG P226 DAO, Smith & Wesson, the Glock 19. Some of y'all might be familiar with that name. So these are some of the firearms that the current NYPD officers are allowed to select from. Women have not always been a part of the NYPD, and I'd like to take a minute to kind of take you through a little bit of the history of women being incorporated into the New York Police Department. Back in 1845, they allowed the first female jail matrons and hired some of the first female police matrons in 1891. That was quite a while between that first female jail matron being hired and the first police matron being hired. 1895, the first woman to work at police headquarters was appointed, secretary to the police board. First female appointed detective, 1912. 1918, first female deputy commissioner appointed. 1918, also first policewoman appointed to the NYPD. Wow. 1919, the title policewoman changed to patrolwoman. 1921, women's police precinct was formed. 1934, female officers began to have pistol practice with male officers. 1942, requirement of a college degree for female officers. Wonder how many officers that excluded, female police officers that excluded. 1958, women and men began to train together at Police Academy. 1961, there was actually a suit to allow women the right to take the sergeant's exam, and after that, 3 years later, the first female sergeants were named, or those titles were earned, I should say. 1967, first female lieutenants. 1971, first female police captain was named. 1973, gender-neutral civil service exam for all officers. That was a huge issue. 1977, first women assigned to the homicide unit. 1978, first female deputy chief. 1984, first female officer shot on duty. 1988, first female aviation officer. And 1991, majority of female deputy commissioners. So we've come a long way with women in the NYPD. Things we're looking up, and with any high times or good times, you also have difficult times. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about some difficult times with the NYPD. In the 1970s, there was an economic downturn, and that meant difficult times for the city as a whole. There was lawlessness throughout the city. There was a financial crisis that led to a hiring freeze from 1976 to 1980. In the 80s and into the 90s, there was the highest homicide rate recorded for the city. There was also issues with drugs, such as the crack cocaine epidemic, and in 1990, there were 2,262 murders. That's the highest rate for any U.S. city. And anytime you have addiction issues, you also have people who go to any means necessary to get what they need to fulfill those addictions. So we had a high rate of theft associated with drug addiction in the 90s.